Imagine the Roaring Twenties. Flapper dresses, swinging jazz, and secret speakeasies packed the brim. It was the era of Prohibition, when the 18th Amendment banned the making, selling, and transporting of alcoholic beverages in the United States. The goal was noble: to reduce crime, solve social problems, and improve health. But what if I told you that in an effort to enforce this ban, the government itself was responsible for a policy that led to the poisoning and deaths of thousands of its own citizens? This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a forgotten chapter of American history known as the Chemists' War of Prohibition. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the years before 1920. Industrial alcohol was a huge business. It was used for everything from making antifreeze and fuel to perfumes and paints, to make sure no one was drinking it. The government had long required companies to denature it, that is, mix it with chemicals to make it undrinkable. The most common denaturant was methyl alcohol, also known as methanol or wood alcohol. It was cheap, effective, and had a distinct taste and smell that usually warned people away. But when Prohibition kicked in, everything changed. Suddenly, a nationwide ban on drinking alcohol created a massive black market. Bootleggers and gangsters like Al Capone saw an opportunity. Their biggest challenge wasn't smuggling in foreign liquor, which was expensive and risky, but finding a cheap, reliable source of alcohol right here at home. And that source was the millions of gallons of industrial alcohol being produced legally every year. They quickly figured out that if they could get their hands on this denatured alcohol, they could try to renature it, attempting to distill out the poisons and sell the resulting product as bootleg gin, whiskey, or moonshine. At first, the government thought its existing denaturing formulas were enough. But bootleggers' chemists became surprisingly skilled at removing the simple poisons. As more and more people started drinking this illicitly cleaned alcohol, the federal government found itself in a frustrating cat-and-mouse game. So, they decided to escalate. They weren't just trying to make the alcohol taste bad anymore. They were going to make it truly, undeniably deadly. Starting around 1926, under the direction of the Treasury Department, the government ordered a change in the industrial alcohol formulas. They mandated the addition of more potent poisons, and in much higher concentrations. They added things like kerosene, brucine, a highly toxic alkaloid, and most significantly, they quadrupled the amount of methanol. Now, instead of just 2%, industrial alcohol contained up to 10% pure methanol. This amount was impossible for bootleg chemists to remove with the technology they had. The government knew exactly what it was doing. Public health officials and doctors warned them about the consequences. Methanol is a brutal poison. Even a small amount can cause blindness as it attacks the optic nerve. A slightly larger dose leads to paralysis, organ failure, and a painful death. But officials, frustrated by the widespread flouting of the law, pushed ahead. They argued that anyone who drank bootleg liquor was a scofflaw who knew the risks. The New York City medical examiner at the time, Charles Norris, famously called it a deliberate policy of poisoning. He saw the results firsthand. The effects were devastating and immediate. In New York City alone, hospital wards began filling up with people suffering from mysterious and violent illnesses. On Christmas Day in 1926, dozens of people died from what doctors initially thought was a holiday drinking binge gone wrong. But Norris and his chief toxicologist, Alexander Hedler, soon realized the truth. They were seeing mass methanol poisoning on an unprecedented scale. The victims weren't just hardened criminals. They were ordinary working-class people, immigrants, and the poor who couldn't afford expensive smuggled liquor and relied on cheap, local bootleg gin. They were the ones paying the ultimate price for the government's policy. Over the next several years, the death toll mounted. It's estimated that at least 10,000 people died as a direct result of this government-mandated poisoning program. Some historians believe the actual number could be much higher, as many deaths in rural areas, or those attributed to alcoholism, were likely misdiagnosed poisonings. The public outcry was immense. Newspapers ran sensational headlines about the murderous alcohol. Anti-prohibition groups pointed to the poisoning program as proof that the entire experiment had become a monstrous failure. They asked a simple question: how could a law meant to improve public health justify a policy that was actively killing citizens? Proponents of prohibition, however, dug in their heels. They deflected blame, placing it squarely on the shoulders of the drinkers themselves. Wayne Wheeler, A leader of the Anti-Saloon League callously stated, "The person who drinks this industrial alcohol is a deliberate suicide. To root out a bad habit, we must be just as heroic as in surgery." To them, these deaths were a form of collateral damage in a righteous war against the evils of alcohol. But this hardline stance began to erode public support. The idea that the government was waging a chemical war against its own people was, for many, a step too far. The great irony of the Prohibition poison program is that it was a spectacular failure on all fronts. It didn't stop people from drinking. In fact, the demand for illegal liquor remained as high as ever. It didn't stop the bootleggers, who simply passed the poisoned product on to unsuspecting customers. All it did was turn a public health issue into a public health crisis, killing thousands of the very people the 18th Amendment was supposed to protect. The program highlighted the fundamental flaws of prohibition. You cannot legislate morality, and when you try, the unintended consequences can be catastrophic. By the early 1930s, the tide had turned. The Great Depression had hit, and the government was desperate for tax revenue that legal alcohol sales could provide. The widespread deaths from poisoned liquor, combined with the rise of organized crime and a general sense that the law wasn't enforceable, created overwhelming pressure to end the noble experiment. In 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified, repealing prohibition once and for all. And just as quickly as it began, the government's program of poisoning industrial alcohol came to an end. Today, the Prohibition poison program is a largely forgotten footnote in history books, overshadowed by the more romanticized tales of speakeasies and gangsters. But it serves as a powerful and chilling reminder of the dangers of government overreach and the law of unintended consequences. It's a story about how a well-intentioned policy, when taken to its extreme, can become something dark and deadly. It shows that, in the war on alcohol, the government's most dangerous weapon wasn't a policeman's billy club, but a chemist's formula. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into a darker side of history interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories you might not have heard before. Let me know in the comments what you think about this shocking policy. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.